new global talk show, Newstellers. Let's meet our panelists. Well, in Korea, there are different themes for each month, and October happens to be the month of culture. And we've got some good news in the cultural industry right now, so let's take a look.
컨텐츠의 기획, 제작, 구현에 이르는 가치 사슬 전반을 지원하고 그 성과를 인재 양성과 기술 개발에 재투자하는 유기적 순환 구조의 플랫폼으로 만들어질 것입니다.
President Park Geun-hye has vowed to put the cultural enrichment plan at the top of her agenda for the second half of her presidency. The Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism, Kim Jong-duk, has announced the government's plan to push forward the Culture Creation Convergence Belt initiative, which will be carried out by launching the Culture Creation Convergence Center in Sangam-dong. The government will also create a 15,000-seat outdoor concert hall for K-pop in Seoul's Olympic Park, along with a multi-purpose cultural center near Gyeongbok Palace in central Seoul called the K-Experience. So why do you think the government is trying to boost the cultural industry as one of its top priorities in its national agenda?
I think nowadays the power of national, like the importance of national image is becoming increasingly important. This is what you call soft power. And you can derive a lot of benefits. And for example, if Korea has a good image, if you think Korea is cool, then you will be more likely to come to visit Seoul or to buy like South Korean mobile smartphones. So we see many countries now, and I think this is what Korea is pretty good at it, are trying to boost their national image and through culture.
So a lot of branding.
It's been a government policy for quite a while to encourage, add incentives to the entertainment industry. There was a book out recently called The Birth of Korean Cool about how, starting with the Kim Dae-jung administration in the late 90s following the IMF crisis throughout Asia, that the administration thought, in order to increase Korea's brand value, to boost Korea's cultural diplomacy, that more money should be given into fostering the entertainment industry, movies, television, music, and it's been very successful for the past 15 years or so.
Yeah, and actually I remember I came here in 2009. I remember how the last government, the Lee Myung-bak government, really pushed Korean culture in the world. And we had that brand like K something that was very successful and made Korean culture known in countries that you would never imagine before, like Latin America, for example.
I think the background to this, at least part of it, is that Korea is no longer a country with cheap labor. And over the past several years, the economy has been somewhat stagnant. So I think the government is looking for new ways, new industries that could provide a sense of growth. And cultural is an obvious factor. I mean, like as Fred mentioned, like if you can promote your culture, you make your exports more attractive, you make yourself more attractive as a destination for tourists. So I think there's a lot of the motivation here is economic.
Okay. So Korean culture is proving a very popular export right now, but we'll be talking about various cultural industries around the world today with our panel, Creating Culture for Export. So with the Korean wave, or Hallyu, and of course, things like Psy's Gangnam Style, the global phenomenon that it was, Korea is quickly becoming the next hub of popular culture. So what do you think makes Korean culture so interesting to people overseas?
Well, in the cultural industry, there's this thing called cool hunting, like always looking for the next thing, like looking for something that is like not that well known yet, that can be marketed in a certain way and can catch on and find a large audience. So, up until several years ago, Korea culturally was just not all that well known overseas. So I think there's been more of a push as to Korean culture as something new in terms of music and film.
Something that I find fascinating is I would never guess it would be possible 10 years ago, but now Korea became somehow a fashion showcase in Asia. There was this really interesting article by AFP a couple of weeks ago explaining how in Asia, Korea became a trendsetter and a very important influencer in the field of fashion. And there was this interesting example of how, this show, My Love from the Stars, where there is an alien coming from whatever the story is. That was extremely popular in China, and because of the success of this drama, all the cosmetics she was using, the shoes she was using became sold out in all over Asia.
Wow.
And I think that's pretty impressive example. And now Korean cosmetics are becoming huge.
Very dedicated fans.
I think in terms of cultural content, the secret of Korean wave is that it's catchy. It goes to every public. It can go to child, to teenagers, even to like a little bit older people. So and their content is very well designed to go to all publics and to be like very fun and very catchy. So I guess that's why people from other nationalities that they don't have anything to do with Korean culture can feel interested about those Korean products.
You know, after that, I read a really interesting article in the Atlantic, an American magazine, about how K-pop surpassed J-pop in Japan. And it filled a sort of niche in the market that wasn't there. The writer argued that you have groups like Girls' Generation or whoever going to Japan. They're more woman-like, they're more sexy, and that appealed to a Japanese audience that just didn't have that type of entertainment. And I think it's fair to say that South Korea and Japan have been somewhat rivals over the years in terms of popular culture. It was a great boost for the South Korean ego to have such success in Japan.
Yeah, I had a really funny example like a couple of weeks ago. Some Korean band, some girls called G-Friends, they were acting in some place that was raining in Seoul, and they were falling all the time over the stage. And those news went all over the world.
And, that's surprising.
And so you can imagine how big is the Korean wave over the world, and that even that that kind of funny thing like that. Can be seen by millions of viewers in different countries.
Well, what a great metaphor. She kept falling over, I think it was 8 times, and every time she just got up and kept dancing.
Yeah.
Work harder, yeah.
Yes.
But it's not only Korean music that has become very popular overseas, Korean food, especially in America, and I think that has a lot to do with the popularity of some Korean American celebrity chefs, like Roy Choi, who is one of the originators, or at least really popularized the gogi, the Korean beef tacos that were popular in Los Angeles food trucks. And then you have David Chang, who opened the chain of the Mamafuku restaurants. So, I think you have a lot of Korean Americans that are bringing the cuisine that they grew up with and introducing it to, a wider gastronomical audience in the U.S. And now, kimchi is becoming a staple product in some more of the high-end supermarkets across the U.S. It's been a real success.
So I think in a lot of aspects of Korean culture, there's something new it factor that appeals to a wide range of people, filling perhaps a niche market. So perhaps that's where the appeal comes from. But Korean pop culture is not the only thing that is storming the world. In our news briefing section, let's talk about some other countries where their cultural elements have gained such popularity over the world that they've become something of a national asset in terms of economic value. Can you think of any examples?
There was a very interesting article in the English newspaper, The Guardian, about Harry Potter and how somehow Harry Potter was behind, the Guardian called it a renaissance of the English filmmaking. Because of the success of the Harry Potter books and then the movies, that brought a lot of investment in English studios.
Right.
So the Warner, they paid a huge sum of money to buy the studios where Harry Potter movies were made. And I didn't know, but after that, a lot of American blockbusters were actually filmed in UK.
Oh, really?
There was X-Men or Pirates of the Caribbean. And Caribbean, like English weather is not very Caribbean to me, but surprisingly enough, you see all these movies being filmed in the UK.
I believe the new Star Wars is also being partially filmed in the UK as well too.
So?
Sure.
And Harry Potter seemed to have played a role. The success of Harry Potter played a role.
Avengers was filmed partly.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm tempted to talk about Canada's finest cultural export, Justin Bieber. But I think a more instructive example for our conversation is Disney in the US. Like, Disney's been around for a very long time, and in the early stages of the studio made some movies that are really iconic now, like Bambi and several others, like movies that are real cultural touchstones for a certain generation. I think even young kids still watch these old classic Disney movies. And that company has come to be so big and so successful that it's almost an industry unto itself. I mean, Disney funds a lot of very like cutting edge animation and film and television products. So that's a good example of when a cultural entity reaches a certain level of success, just how big of a space they can occupy in the economy.
Now that you talk about Disney in the US, I can say about Hello Kitty in Japan, for example. You know, it's an interesting.
We know you're a fan.
I am a total fan of Hello Kitty. Actually,
I've seen your lunchbox.
yeah. And my bag, everything for Hello Kitty.
Yeah.
You know. Okay. Well, actually, not my thing, I have to say. But I can say Hello Kitty. At first, you could imagine that it would be a product only for children. It's really, really childish. But with a really nice marketing strategy, it can be exported to all over the world. It's that Japanese brand with that really, really smart team that could make that company really big, and even famous people like Katy Perry or Lady Gaga can wear the clothes and the accessories of Hello Kitty.
And Spanish foreign correspondents.
Well, of course, everyone talks about Hollywood in the US, but I mean, in India, you have Bollywood, which makes sometimes 4 times as many films a year than Hollywood does. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's 1 billion people in India buying tickets. I mean, it's a real powerhouse, and it has gained international appeal. I think that many, at least American audiences, perhaps flipping through the cable channels, might come across these grand musicals and elaborate choreography of some of the more traditional Bollywood movies. But then you also have movies like Slumdog Millionaire that absolutely that won acclaim across the world for its story about a depiction of poverty in India.
The culture having a massive impact everywhere, it seems. There are some concerns, though, of course, about the industrialization of culture, that the authenticity of culture itself is being lost if the focus is on creating economic value in it. And there are a lot of skeptics as well about creating economic value in popular culture rather than just appreciating and enjoying it per se. So what would your thoughts be on such concerns?
I think culture is adapting to how the world is these days. These days we have a smartphone, and in 2 years we have a new smartphone. We have clothes and we change it all the time. So of course it's difficult that we can have like cultural references like the Beatles, or like even much farther ago like Quixote or Picasso, or these kind of things that keep there forever as cultural references of a country. Now we have trends, and well, the government and the companies, they just promote some trends and they sell them, and they need to sell something new to the customers, and that's a business.
But I think one of the biggest problems these days is that companies, neoliberal economists, policymakers, they consider cultural products as any economic product, and that's a grave mistake. I wrote recently an article about how the Korean cinema suffered a loss from, they used to have quota to protect Korean cinema. And the quota were lessened, and there was a lot of economic argument. But the effect of that is that now the Korean cinema is mostly producing big Hollywood kind of blockbusters.
Right.
And there is no space anymore for independent movies in Korean cinema. And there is all the big names that made Korean cinema very famous abroad, like Kim Gi-duk, Lee Chang-dong, or Hong Sang-soo. These amazing filmmakers, they have troubles to produce their movies these days. And we don't see any big name emerging as they used to. So I think Korean cinema suffer a lot because of this economy and industrial kind of approach.
Okay.
For creativity to flourish, or creative industry to flourish, people need to be making money from it. There needs to be funding. So how do we strike this balance between a creative industry that has enough money for people to live and people to fund their projects, but doesn't have so much money in it that it gets all messed up in different ways?
Yeah. Interesting point. Okay. So we've mainly discussed the economic impacts of the cultural industries so far, but culture also affects us in many different ways, and so do the businesses that are involved. So let's take a look at this story. London's 2012 Olympic ceremony was a success in highlighting the strength of British culture. Film director Danny Boyle orchestrated an outstanding opening ceremony with references to Shakespeare, the Beatles, James Bond, Mr. Bean, Harry Potter, all of which have gained worldwide recognition. Such pop culture content became a firm backdrop in creating a storyline for the ceremony, which played a strong part in promoting the image of the UK as a liberal nation. I think my favourite part, though, was the Queen parachuting out of the helicopter. That's part of the ceremony. But the cultural industry seems to play a part in diplomacy as well, it seems. So what other impact can we expect from integrating culture into business other than economic gain?
Well, I see several, but one of the first impact is you have more people learning your language if your culture is attractive. And this is definitely what we're seeing now in Korea, with many people abroad learning Korean. The second impact is you can gain diplomatic influence. And I think, once again, it's very important in Korea when you have this fight between North and South Korea for the legitimacy on the peninsula. And Korea obviously won, and I think its culture, the attractiveness of its culture, played a part. And the third point I can see is that from a domestic point of view, that can help to boost nationalism and the self-pride of your people.
Also, in the case of Korea, it's a way to catch up with Japan. In the case of Korea and Japan, they have been rivals in the history. And when I was a child, I remember we had Japanese cartoons everywhere, Japanese comics. So Japan has been very, very good at promoting their contents abroad. And Korea had Japan as their reference in the history because they had to develop faster and later. And for example, Korea catch up already with Japan in technology, and they catch up already in producing cars and industry and a lot of things. But now with the culture, they are on the way to be known all over the world for their contents and their songs and their dramas and everything.
You know, just the medical tourism industry in South Korea has benefited from the Korean wave. I mean, you have so many Chinese tourists who have been watching Korean dramas, Korean movies, watching Korean celebrities perform, who come here to have plastic surgery to look like their favorite Korean celebrities. So I mean, I think this was, I can't say this was an intended or unintended consequence of the Korean wave, but it's definitely boosted a particular industry here.
Wide range of impacts here. We've talked about language, diplomatic influence, competitive edge, and perhaps some unintended consequences in the beauty industry as well. So we talked about the power of cultural industries in the first section, and it seems there's a lot of potential in the future for cultural businesses. But can you explain how other nations have supported and promoted their culture and art businesses, what kind of initiatives and policies they have in place?
Well, we have this example in Europe. The European Council realized that culture represents more or less the 3% of the gross domestic product of the European Union. And they decided to promote cultures through different ways. They are giving some financial support, and they are trying to give the country some guidelines to promote culture and to take advantage of culture as an economic asset.
Okay.
Yeah, in France, I mean, first, domestically, there is a lot of many policies to try to boost and promote creativity. For example, in the cinema, there is a lot of subsidies to promote French movies. In the field of literature as well. And then internationally, France has a very strong cultural diplomacy with more than around 1,000 what we call Alliances Françaises, who are like institutes to learn French. And there is Institut Français, who are like cultural centers all around the world. I mean, of course, this is criticized. People say the budget is too low, and we are kind of lagging behind in terms of digital soft power.
Right.
But still, there is a lot of effort at the institutional level through this network of agencies around the world to promote our culture.
Of course, in the U.S., there are many government-sponsored endowments or incentives to support artists and other creative types. But really, the brass ring in America is the MacArthur Fellowship, which is also known as the Genius Grant. This gives a couple dozen creators a year. These could be artists, they could be scientists, or researchers that are doing important work or really contributing to the culture and the knowledge of the U.S. They award them $625,000 over the course of 5 years to carry out their research. And I think it's what every creative type dreams of. Even they can't apply for the grant themselves, they have to be nominated. But it's really, I think philanthropy in the US is really a great way that art, creativity is supported.
Well, going back to Europe, in recent years, Berlin has become a very important cultural hub. If you go there and spend time there, there's all kinds of artist collaboratives and hubs, and there's a few well-known art markets. But I think one thing that we got to mention with Berlin is that I think one thing that's made it a cultural hub is that it has a pretty reasonable cost of living. You know, like creative people who maybe don't have a very stable income can set up shop in Berlin and they can sort of live off their savings, or they can have some time where they don't have a huge amount of pressure to make money and they can pursue their craft. You look at cities like New York in recent years, I mean, like New York has become a much blander place, I think, culturally than it used to, because the cost of living is just so high. If you don't have, you know, a very well-paying job, if you're not already very well established, it's a very hard place to live. And if you're just trying to, you know, start doing your work as an artist, it's not a place you would go to.
It's the same for Paris, actually.
Yeah.
But that's a big problem for Paris, where the rent is too expensive now.
So a range of methods around the world in order to support new and existing artists and create new culture as well. Well, it seems that the South Korean government will be putting in extra effort to promote the cultural industry next year. So let's see what's on their agenda. The government's arts and culture budget for 2016 increased by 7.5% to over $5 billion. The budget for the Cultural Creation Convergence Belt is estimated to be around $112 million, and $19 million will be invested in building the very first outdoor arena in the country. The budget for monthly culture days will be increased from around $7 million to $12 million, and the government will also raise the number of future artists from 3,500 to 4,000 for the support fund. So big things to come in terms of culture and art in the next year or so. The government have also expanded their budget for other sectors, including the game industry, tourism programs for the Winter Olympics, and medical care system for foreigners. So are there any particular points on this agenda that you find impressive, or would you say there's anything particularly appropriate or unnecessary even?
Well, I think they should give us more national holidays so people can go around the country and see the wonderful cultural assets of Korea.
I'm, of course, a bit concerned. You know, I think it is important for a government to provide some subsidies to artists, to creators. But I'm curious about what the stipulations are to receive this money. Like, and this could in fact alienate other musicians, artists, entertainers that don't fit into what the government sees as the categories or the genres that deserve funding. So I don't know what the rules will be to receive this kind of funding.
I mean, I agree with Jason. I think there's some limitations of fostering culture from the government side, like from a kind of top-down level. I think most examples of cultural industries that really flourish is when they have a paying audience, like when there are people who are willing to buy their products because they're interested in it, and artists can make their living just from doing their work and having that be it, and not needing to rely on.
So while it's great that the government is helping to support and promote figures in arts and culture, they perhaps need to think about the system surrounding discovering and creating new artists as well. Shall we wrap up with our headlines? Fred, you ready?
Yeah, I think my headline for this article, if I had to write an article, I would write like South Korea, an emerging soft power.
Okay.
I would say culture is an asset, not a product.
Soo-jung, I'd like to pose my headline in the form of a question.
Okay.
Can creativity flourish from the top down?
An interesting question indeed.
Well, that's kind of related to what I wanted to say. I wanted to say culture really flourishes from the bottom up. So it's a direct refutation.
From either sides of the same coin there. Well, thank you guys for your insight. Another fascinating topic this week. Hope you enjoyed yourselves.
It was
Very
interesting to speak.
Can't wait to see what our topic is next week. So join us next week, viewers, for a whole new global talk show, Newstellers. We will be open for any opinions or requests on our official website as well as our Facebook page.
think any cultural industry is really affected when big amounts of money become involved.
I think they should do more to protect their own artists. If you're a musician in Korea, what you make by selling MP3 is close to nothing.
And I think they should set the environment for the genius to come up. These kind of fast products can give you like a little boost sometimes, but they are easily forgotten.
There is a very limited amount of space, especially children in their teenage years, because they're so restricted because of the studying for the university entrance exam.